Amaran Woy had learned something important about disappearing. No one notices right away. The city kept moving around her. Cars passing, lights changing, people laughing into their phones, while she stood on the edge of a life that had quietly fallen apart. Friends had stopped answering. Promises had expired. Even her name felt lighter, as if it could be erased without effort. That was when the black car stopped. Not slowly, not politely. It pulled up like it already belonged there. Amara barely had time to turn before the door opened and Kong Min-jae stepped out. Tall, perfectly still, dressed like a man who didn't ask questions unless he already knew the answers. His eyes moved over her once, not with concern but with assessment, as if her entire life had just been summarized in a single glance. "Get in," he said. Not a request. Conclusion. Amara took a step back. "I don't need help." Min-jae tilted his head slightly. "That's not true." He said her name next. Her full name. Her breath caught. "You were abandoned because you stopped being useful to the people who benefited from you," he continued calmly. "They assumed you'd disappear quietly. I don't." She should have run. She should have screamed. Instead, she stood frozen, because in his voice was something more terrifying than threat. Certainty. Amara didn't know it yet, but the moment Kong Min-jae chose to intervene, her life stopped being her own in the way she understood it. And what he planned to do next would shock everyone who thought they knew him. Amaran Woy learned the city's rhythm by listening to what it ignored. Morning arrived whether she was ready or not. Shops lifted their shutters. Trains sighed and moved on. People hurried past her with purpose stitched into their steps. She stood among them like a pause no one noticed, present but unaccounted for. Her phone stayed quiet. Not broken. Just forgotten. Messages she'd sent days ago remained unread, their blue ticks never arriving. The last place she'd called home had stopped answering after the third attempt, as if silence might teach her what words no longer could. Even the places that once welcomed her now felt unfamiliar, their doors closing earlier, their smiles thinner. She had not changed overnight. She had simply slipped out of relevance. It wasn't one disaster that unraveled her life. It was a series of small, careful losses. A promise that turned into a delay that turned into an excuse that turned into absence. People didn't betray her loudly. They just stopped choosing her. Amara rented a room that echoed when she moved. The walls were bare, the furniture borrowed, the mirror cracked just enough to split her reflection into uneven halves. She stopped fixing her hair in the mornings, stopped checking the weather, stopped believing that preparation led anywhere worth going. At night, she lay awake listening to the sounds outside. Laughter from the street below, music drifting from somewhere she wasn't invited to, life continuing without her permission. She told herself she was resting, recovering, waiting. But waiting for what? She had once been the dependable one, the smart one, the woman people called when they needed answers. Now she was a name that made conversations uncomfortable, a reminder of something unresolved. It was easier for them to move on without her than to admit what they'd taken. Some days she walked for hours just to feel movement again. Past cafes where people met eyes and shared futures. Past offices where lights stayed on late for reasons that mattered. She blended into the background, learning how to be unseen without trying. What frightened her most wasn't the loneliness. It was how normal it began to feel. By the time the city decided she no longer belonged, Amara had already started believing it. So when the world finally turned its back completely, when there was no one left to call, no place left to return to, it didn't arrive as a shock. It arrived quietly, almost gently. And that was the moment she understood the truth she'd been avoiding. She wasn't falling apart. She had already fallen. She just hadn't hit the ground yet. Kong Min-jae did not build his reputation by raising his voice. He built it by never needing to. People learned his rules without being told. Meetings ended when he arrived. Conversations softened when his name was mentioned. In rooms filled with powerful men, he was the one no one interrupted, not out of respect but caution. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, decisions followed as if they had already been agreed upon. He never interfered in things that didn't concern him. That was the line everyone knew. If a problem didn't touch his interests, it might as well not exist. Entire companies collapsed beyond his reach while he watched from a distance, unmoved. Careers ended. Alliances broke. He remained still, untouched by noise or sentiment. It was said he believed emotions blurred outcomes, that mercy complicated efficiency, that involvement created weakness. Min-jae preferred clean edges. His world was ordered. Black cars arriving on time, doors opening before he reached them, information delivered before he asked. He didn't chase rumors. They came to him. He didn't threaten. People simply understood the consequences of disappointing him. To those who worked for him, he was precise. To those who opposed him, invisible until it was too late. And to everyone else, he was a figure spoken about carefully, as if saying his name too loudly might invite attention. He wore his power the way he wore his suits, tailored, restrained, flawless. Nothing about him suggested chaos. Even his silences were deliberate. Min-jae had seen desperation before. He'd watched it distort judgment, make people loud and careless. He'd learned early that the fastest way to lose control was to mistake sympathy for strategy. So he stopped stepping in, stopped reacting, stopped caring about stories that ended badly. The city understood this about him. If Kang Min-jae noticed you, it meant something had already gone wrong. That was why, when his car slowed near a quiet street no one important passed through, it surprised the men with him. The driver glanced in the mirror, uncertain. The security detail shifted, alert. Min-jae said nothing at first. He looked out the window and saw a woman standing alone, her posture tight, her attention turned inward as if she were bracing against something only she could feel. She didn't look lost. She looked finished. He studied her the way he studied balance sheets and contracts, searching for patterns, causes, conclusions. There was no drama in her stillness, no plea for attention, just the absence of expectation. That was what made him pause. He had walked past countless lives like hers without breaking stride. That was the rule. That was how things stayed simple. But this time, something about the quiet finality in her stance caught his attention. And for the first time in years, Kang Min-jae considered doing the one thing everyone believed he never did: interfere. Amara's heart pounded before she even saw them. The sound of footsteps, deliberate and precise, echoed against the narrow alley walls. She turned just in time to see the black car slide to a stop, sleek and silent, as if it had appeared out of the shadows themselves. A door opened and he stepped out. Kang Min-jae, tall, immovable, every movement measured with a cold authority that made her instinctively shrink back. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice low, almost casual, yet impossible to refuse. It was not a question, not an invitation. It was a command that left no room for argument. Her first thought was to run. Her legs felt heavy, uncooperative, as if the world itself were holding her down. "I don't need help," she whispered, but her words were swallowed by the silence that seemed to press from all sides. Min-jae's eyes didn't soften. They didn't blink. They merely assessed, weighed, and concluded. Then the car door opened fully, and two men stepped out. Broad, silent, armed, not menacingly, but in a way that confirmed everything she had feared. She had no choice. She hesitated, a brief flutter of defiance rising, but it was already extinguished by the sheer certainty in Min-jae's presence. As she was guided into the back seat, the city passed in streaks of neon and shadow. She tried to speak, to demand answers, to assert herself, but he ignored her entirely. He made calls in rapid Korean, issuing instructions that seemed both urgent and surgical. Amara realized that every movement, the positioning of the men, the route the car took, the timing of every stop, was preordained. She was not being rescued in the way she had imagined as a child, or even as an adult clinging to the last threads of hope. This was intervention on his terms, precise and unyielding. She was protected, yes, but only insofar as she followed the rules, the invisible boundaries he had already set. The air inside the car was thick with implication. Every choice she thought she had made had been preempted by someone who had already decided her course. By the time they arrived at the place he had chosen, she understood fully that she was trapped, not out of cruelty but out of control. The house smelled faintly of polished wood and cold authority, every item in place as if the space itself were an extension of him. He didn't speak as she stepped inside. He only watched, calculating, precise, and utterly detached. Amara wanted to resist, to protest, to reclaim some fragment of independence, but the truth pressed against her chest. This was help, yes, but it was help dictated entirely on his terms. She could be protected or she could be free, but the two were not the same. And for the first time in months, she realized that her survival would mean walking the line he had drawn, whether she liked it or not. The rescue felt like a trap because, in every subtle way, it was. And yet, in the quiet tension of that moment, a flicker of reluctant trust began to stir, an acknowledgement that the man who had claimed control might also be the only person capable of giving her a chance to survive. Amara stood in the quiet of the house, the faint hum of the city outside barely reaching her. The rooms were immaculate, each surface polished, every object placed with deliberate intent. It should have felt safe, even comforting, but the precision of it all made her chest tighten. This wasn't home. This wasn't sanctuary. It was control packaged as protection. Min-jae didn't wait for her to settle. He didn't ask if she was hungry or tired. Instead, he outlined rules. Unspoken, rigid, and absolute. Time she could move, rooms she could enter, questions she could ask, and those she could not. Each guideline carried the weight of a consequence she hadn't fully understood yet. Protection came with terms, and each term reminded her that freedom had a cost she hadn't been prepared to pay. She wanted to protest, wanted to claim that her survival shouldn't demand surrender. But Min-jae's gaze was steady, unyielding, and precise. Every glance, every pause, every minimal movement from him conveyed a single truth. In this arrangement, he dictated the parameters, and she would comply if she wanted to stay alive. It was subtle at first. A firm suggestion to stay in one room. A silent correction when her footsteps strayed into the hall before he had deemed it safe. Every action reminded her that she was no longer fully her own. The protection he offered wasn't kindness. It was leverage. She was safe only because he chose to make her so. And if that choice ever shifted, the security she clung to could vanish in an instant. Amara realized the truth as she watched him move through the house, every step controlled, every decision deliberate. He didn't offer comfort. He offered oversight. He didn't promise mercy. He promised consequence. And she was already feeling the weight of the bargain. Safety demanded obedience, awareness, and quiet acknowledgement of his authority. Her mind turned over every moment that had led to this point, the betrayals, the losses, the moments of abandonment, and understood how easily she had been left to drift. Now, for the first time, someone powerful had intervened. But the price was clear. Autonomy traded for security, freedom traded for survival. And yet, beneath the tension, a strange clarity began to take shape. If she could navigate his rules, anticipate his decisions, and prove her worth, the protection could become an opportunity. Survival might be purchased at the cost of compliance, but the knowledge she gained, the alliances she could forge, could eventually tip the balance back toward her favor. For now, she would follow the rules. She had no choice. Power, she realized, always came with a price. And in this house, that price was hers to reckon with. Amara had thought she could keep her past buried, tucked behind quiet routines and careful avoidance. She had moved through the city like a shadow, assuming no one was paying attention, certain that the mistakes, betrayals, and stolen efforts were invisible to anyone outside her own memory. She was wrong. Min-jae didn't speak loudly, didn't interrogate, didn't need to. He simply began to reveal details about her life, seamlessly weaving them into conversations that left her breath caught in her chest. The name of a mentor who had turned against her, The exact date her research had been taken and published under someone else's name, the small betrayals that had felt personal but were really systematic. Each revelation landed like a measured strike, precise, undeniable, impossible to dismiss. "People assumed you would disappear quietly," he said once, his voice neutral, almost dispassionate. "They underestimated what you could accomplish. They also underestimated the consequences of their choices." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the chair. How did he know? Each secret he revealed was intimate, a reminder of the life she had tried to protect from judgment and exposure. Her failures, her losses, her moments of desperation. He knew them all. And he didn't flinch. He didn't offer consolation. He didn't even wait for her reaction. He simply observed, as if cataloging the pieces of a puzzle he intended to use. Amara's mind raced, trying to identify a single misstep that had led to this moment. Nothing seemed small enough, yet nothing seemed like it could justify the depth of his knowledge. She realized, with a strange mixture of fear and awe, that he had been watching in ways she couldn't even comprehend. The man who never interfered had noticed everything. The betrayals she had assumed were invisible were now fully exposed, dissected, and understood. He didn't offer answers to the questions that clawed at her mind, only a presence that made her aware of her own vulnerability. Every glance, every word, every pause reminded her that the past she had tried to escape was not hers alone to control anymore. For the first time in months, Amara felt cornered not by circumstance, but by someone who understood the totality of her story. She had survived by obscurity and avoidance, but that strategy no longer applied. He knew too much, and that knowledge shifted the balance entirely. Her past was no longer hidden. Her mistakes were no longer hers alone to bear. And the realization that someone this powerful held awareness of every fracture, every loss, every betrayal, left her simultaneously exposed and strangely alive. The question settled in her mind like an echo she could not ignore. What did he intend to do with all he knew? Amara sat in the dim light of the safe house, the faint hum of the city below reminding her that life continued even when hers felt suspended. She had expected to find protection here, or at least distance from the world that had abandoned her. Instead, she found clarity, harsh, unflinching, and impossible to ignore. Min-jae had not rushed to explain. He never rushed. But as the hours passed, the pieces of her life that had been scattered began to align under his quiet observation. He spoke of people she had trusted, colleagues and mentors alike, in a tone stripped of judgment yet heavy with precision. Each revelation landed with a weight that made her stomach twist. "You thought they valued you," he said, calm and deliberate. "You believed loyalty and hard work would protect you. They never intended it to. They only needed your efforts until it no longer served them." Amara's throat tightened. The words confirmed what she had always suspected but had refused to admit. The stolen research, the false praise, the colleagues who had turned smiles into knives. Every small compromise she had made, every trust she had offered, had been catalogued and exploited. Her fall had been orchestrated, piece by piece, by people who had smiled at her while plotting her removal. "They wanted to erase you," Min-jae continued, voice low and steady. "They assumed no one would notice until it was too late. That's why they moved so carefully, so quietly. You were never the mistake. They were never careless. You were a target, nothing more." The room felt colder, though the temperature had not changed. Amara's chest ached with a mixture of rage, grief, and disbelief. 7 years of work, ideas she had nurtured like fragile glass, stolen and repurposed. Recognition she had been promised, taken. Opportunities she had earned, denied. And for months, she had blamed herself for missteps, for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting herself better. Now she understood the truth. Her fall was not a result of weakness, but of calculation. And the realization was both devastating and liberating. She could no longer cling to illusions of innocence or fairness. The betrayal was complete, undeniable, and exposed. Min-jae watched her silently, his presence like a shadow that neither pressed nor receded. He didn't offer comfort, but he offered understanding. Not pity. Not kindness. Understanding. And in that understanding, Amara glimpsed the possibility of reclaiming what had been taken. For the first time since the betrayal began, she felt the faint stirrings of resolve. She had been destroyed by deceit, yes. But now, armed with the knowledge of who had orchestrated it, she could begin to navigate the path back. The fall had been orchestrated, but the rise, her rise, was hers to claim. And she would. Amara paced the length of the room. Her footsteps quiet against the polished floor but heavy with the weight of words she refused to speak. The house was silent, but the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were aware of the tension between them. Min-jae watched her from the corner, calm, composed, unmoved by the agitation that had taken root in her. "You can't control everything," she said finally, her voice low but sharp, slicing through the stillness. "You can protect me, yes, but I am not yours to command. Have my own choices. My own life." Min-jae's expression remained unreadable. His dark eyes tracing her movements without judgment, without urgency. He did not step forward. He did not raise his voice. His presence alone made the room feel smaller, suffocating even, but Amara refused to yield. "Do you think obedience equals safety?" she pressed, stopping just short of him. "Do you think keeping me under your watch makes me free? I'm not afraid of danger. I'm afraid of losing myself. And right now, that's exactly what's happening." For a moment there was silence. A pause so deliberate that it felt as though the world had stopped alongside them. Then he spoke, low, measured, almost casual. "Safety comes at a price," he said. "Choice has consequences. You have more freedom than you think, Amara Nwoy. You just haven't exercised it yet in the context of survival." Her pulse quickened. His words were correct, undeniably so, and it frustrated her. It was the kind of clarity that left no room for argument, no space to claim victory. She wanted to strike back with indignation, to assert her independence with force, but the moment she opened her mouth, she realized the truth of it. He wasn't wrong. His control was a framework, not a prison. Her resistance, her defiance, could only exist within the boundaries he had drawn. And yet, within those boundaries, there was room to maneuver. Amara's mind raced. She understood now that this confrontation was not about defeating him. It was about understanding the balance, about recognizing the interplay between dominance and choice. He offered protection, yes, but it was up to her whether she allowed it to define her entirely, or whether she used it as leverage to reclaim her voice, her agency, her future. Her anger softened into a cautious clarity. She could challenge him. She could bend the rules, test the boundaries, assert herself without rejecting his authority outright. Power and choice could coexist, if she approached them carefully. She stopped pacing and met his gaze squarely. "Then I will decide how to move forward," she said, steady, deliberate. "Within your terms if I must, but I will not let your dominance dictate who I am entirely." Min-jae's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval, though it was impossible to read. For the first time since their uneasy alliance began, the tension shifted. Not broken, not resolved, but acknowledged. The line between control and choice had been drawn, and Amara understood she could navigate it. She would not surrender herself completely. Not now. Not ever. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the polished floors of the safe house. Amara had grown accustomed to the quiet, to the rhythm of control and observation, but today felt different. Electric, tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. Min-jae stood near the window, hands behind his back, the faint hum of the city beyond barely registering in his awareness. He didn't speak at first. He simply observed, silent, unreadable, a man whose thoughts were shielded behind walls no one could breach. Amara watched him from across the room, her pulse uneven, waiting for the familiar pattern to resume. Rules, boundaries, calculated movements. But this time there was a pause, a space pregnant with expectation, as if he were weighing more than just safety. Finally he turned, his dark eyes locking on hers. "I've decided," he said simply, deliberately. His tone flat yet final. The weight in those words made her stomach tighten. "You will leave tomorrow." Amara froze. Leave. She had expected everything from him. Oversight, orders, perhaps subtle manipulations. But release. The notion was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I leave," she whispered, unsure she had heard him correctly. "You're letting me go." His gaze didn't waver. "Not just letting you go. I'm giving you a chance to reclaim what is yours. On your terms. You have endured enough of their control, enough of being underestimated. It is time for you to act, to decide what you will do next." Shock crashed over her in waves. Every instinct screamed resistance, disbelief, confusion. Why would he step back now, after orchestrating protection with such precision, after knowing every betrayal and secret she had hidden from the world? It defied everything she had come to understand about him, about power, about control. I don't know if I can," she admitted, voice trembling, a mixture of fear and tentative hope. "After everything, how do I start again?" Min Jae's expression softened, though ever so slightly. "By remembering what they tried to take from you. Your work, your voice, your agency. They cannot own what you decide to reclaim. I can protect you, but only you can rebuild." Her chest tightened, a mix of relief, apprehension, and disbelief. For the first time, the cage of rules, the careful orchestration of his presence, the weight of his knowledge, it all shifted. She could act. She could move. She could choose. The realization settled over her like a slow dawn. The man who had seemed untouchable, controlling, impenetrable, had made a choice no one expected. He had relinquished control, not out of weakness, not out of distraction, but out of understanding. Her survival, her rise, her agency, those were hers now to command. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the tremor of possibility run through her. The world outside had not changed, but she had. And in the quiet certainty of Min Jae's unexpected decision, she found something she had not felt in years. The clarity to stand, to step forward, and to reclaim herself entirely. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the city as Amara stepped out of the safe house, the morning air crisp against her skin. She drew in a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do for months. The streets stretched before her, familiar yet changed, as if the city itself were waiting to see what she would do next. For the first time since her life had begun to unravel, she walked with purpose, aware of every step but unburdened by fear. The betrayals that had haunted her, the stolen work, the mentors who had deceived her, the isolation that had felt permanent, still lingered in memory, but they no longer dictated her path. Each one was a lesson, a warning, a reminder that survival required more than endurance. It required action. She paused at a cafe she had once frequented, watching people move around her, lives unfolding in parallel to her own. She felt neither envy nor resentment. She felt readiness. Her eyes, once dull with exhaustion, now gleamed with focus and determination. She understood that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing, consciously, what to carry and what to leave behind. Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, letting the moment stretch, letting herself feel the unfamiliar weight of freedom. When she finally checked it, there were messages waiting, opportunities she had once assumed were lost forever. She smiled faintly, recognizing that the world hadn't changed, she had. And that difference was everything. Every step she took reinforced the realization that power could no longer be something imposed upon her. She had agency now. Her voice mattered. Her decisions would shape her path, not the calculations of others. Kang Min-jae's intervention had been decisive, but the choice he had given her, the space to reclaim herself, was even more profound. She moved through the streets with a quiet confidence, observing, calculating, ready. Every glance, every gesture was deliberate. She was cautious, yes, but she was no longer paralyzed. The city had tried to ignore her, to erase her existence, but now she claimed it on her own terms. By the time she reached her destination, a small office where she could rebuild her research, her work, her purpose, she felt the full weight of possibility. The mistakes of the past, the betrayals, the fear, They were all behind her, memorials of what she had endured. Ahead lay action, reclamation, and choice. Amara paused at the threshold, taking one last breath, and stepped forward. Each movement was deliberate, measured, a declaration that she was no longer defined by what had been taken from her. She was defined by what she would do next. The streets, the city, the world, it had not changed. She had. And in that difference, she discovered a simple truth. A woman who walks forward on her own terms can never be stopped.